Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights here with Rich Klein. We're going to talk about a topic that we've been hearing a little buzz about, which is table sharing that occurs at some big shows and is especially being looked at now with the new promoters of the National, of tightening up a little bit on some of the rules for table sharing, or maybe even calling it table subleasing. Rich and I both have opinions. We go to the National and there's always people there that it isn't their table, and with new promoters, we'll see. Thanks, sponsors: Topps, Panini, Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Huggins Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentications. Rich, you've been at almost as many Nationals as I've been to. There's always people there, or table arrangements that are complicated, let's say. What's on your mind? Because I think this is the year the new promoters are going to, quote unquote, crack down a little bit.
To me, it's almost unenforceable. I've done this in the past. In 2008, people gifted me their booths at the National, and I took them, and they never showed up. And I'm okay with those people losing tables. That is not in the spirit. You're taking booths and tables away from people who want it. I'm in favor of, hey, if you don't show up or you don't clear it in advance, it's gone.
No,
I'm okay with that.
Wait a minute. No, you're gone.
Yes.
Because if they have a problem, then you have a problem. If they're not allowed to sublease their table, then you're not allowed to just put your stuff out.
Right, but I'm allowed to still attend the shows, and I'm still allowed to
their table. You couldn't use their table. They'd be kicked out, or they would lose priority points or something.
Right.
So,
and I'm okay with that. And you're right. The person subleasing should suffer a penalty. That is definitely not in the spirit of the National rules. I sent you a series of examples.
Great example. So is it use it or lose it? If you can't go to the National, I know who you're talking about. Was it their responsibility to contact the promoter at the time and say, I've got a health problem or some other problem. I'm not going to be able to make it. Can you sell my tables for me? And then I can maybe get a partial refund or something. But the contract for the table probably does not allow you to sublease or to sell it. And if some of them are selling it for a profit.
Right. We're in agreement that it has to be tightened up. Part of the issue is, are you there or not there? But for example, when my wife got her kidney transplant, we had a 3 days notice. She went to New York on Monday before Thanksgiving. If that happened to me and I find out she's eligible for it on Wednesday, what if it happens Monday as I'm on my way to the National and I'm told, no, you have to come back home because the kidney transplant people, if you're traveling anywhere, requires somebody to be with you. But you can't do the rehab yourself. That is a very tricky issue.
But it's not tricky. It's not tricky if you have a heart, because a reasonable person would say, Rich, you need to be with Dina. You need to be with your wife and all that. The problem is, if you committed to having the table, do you need to allow them to resell it for you, or can you resell it? I think they're not going to want you to resell your table, and they don't want it to be empty either. But they have a waiting list. But
it's 2 days notice.
Maybe if they can't fill somebody from the waiting list, you're on the hook. But maybe you could fill somebody from the waiting list because you've got a great list of contacts of saying, hey, here's the problem. But would they stand in the way? Would they say, hey, this is not legal. You're not an authorized dealer. We have no contract with you. Hence, we have liability of you being here and you not being in a contractual relationship with us.
It depends what the contract says, because having run shows, and granted, my shows were never this level, but if somebody showed up for somebody, that's fine. You're taking the table, and the hotel had the insurance, not me.
Okay, that's an extreme example. The sympathy would totally be toward you, and yet the promoter's trying to run a business and trying to figure out, how can I provide a good experience for those people that are coming to the show, that all the tables are full, and that we're getting properly paid for the people.
They've already been paid for the booth. The question is, do you then refund the money, or do you just say tough luck? And then if I say tough luck, then let me refill the booth.
That would be reasonable to me. Okay, what do you do with the Jimmy Spence situation? Now, for many years, he was the quote unquote business partner, so to speak, of Wes Parker, who had an early table and had table priority. And Jimmy Spence has worked his way into that's his slot. I think he should be amnestied and grandfathered in, that he's a longtime table holder. But Wes Parker is the nominal table holder.
Same thing with AU Sports and Memory Lane Auction. Do you not want Memory Lane Auction to show what they're going to have? They usually have a great display of items upcoming in a future auction.
So I agree, but what's your solution?
I suspect The promoters would want Memory Lane to take more of a corporate thing and AU Sports maybe to go from 2 booths to 1. They're still keeping their booth, but then Memory Lane becomes a corporate sponsor.
That's a big financial hit that Memory Lane's going to take because the corporate booths are bigger and more expensive. And AU Sports is still going, right?
They still have a store. None of the Golds are involved anymore, but the company still exists.
Okay. So they could legitimately have a table. And if somebody walked up to their table and said, this table is registered to AU Sports, show us your credentials. If it's Memory Lane, then there's a potential problem. If somebody says, hey, we're the new owners, it'd be hard to verify that.
When you have a business, for example, the Krause tables were under Bob Lemke. When Bob passed, the National would not let anybody from Krause just set up a table as Lemke. They were told the only way you could come back in is a corporate booth.
There were some personalities involved in that decision. Hopefully, when the new promoters come in, it's a fresh start to treat corporates appropriately and treat dealers appropriately. But if you are the table holder of record of a dealer table, you ought to be the one behind it. Now, maybe you could have one assistant, but you could get 2 badges per table.
Yes.
But they need to be registered and the affiliation needs to be noted. If it's sports, at least one of them has to have some employment or connection to AU Sports.
And I do know the people from AU Sports. They still have their store. They're like on the backside of Memory Lane.
You're pointing out something with your hobby knowledge and history. You're vouching for them. Okay.
Yes.
And you could vouch for a bunch of them. The 2 guys that are good buddies that are right at the front door, we know them personally and we could vouch for them. The problem comes of the people that we can't vouch for that people might be turning in. I don't think we would be snitches, but somebody's going to say, hey, that guy is misrepresenting. That person sold their table for double price. And that's not fair because I'm on the waiting list to get a table. And then you're turning in your hobby sisters and brothers. That just doesn't seem right.
And the other problem, if you turn them in during the show, all of a sudden, it's hard to get people with no notice to show up unless they live locally in Cleveland this year.
At Kyle's shows that we go to every couple of months, there are empty tables. And I think sometimes don't people put their wares out there? Because if there's an empty table there, it's better to be full. But does Kyle or one of his assistants charge somebody for a day rate for the table?
Sometimes if they know that's coming, yes. If the person sneaks in, they may not be able to catch everybody. But yes, if it's worked out, they will do something like that. It's the right thing to do for all concerned. If somebody doesn't show up, I'm not yet ready to do a Dallas card show, having sold out a couple months ago. I'm building back. But I could conceivably show up and just create something.
On Friday, if there was an empty table, you could go to Kyle and say, hey, can I bring some boxes? What would you charge me? But again, that's dealing with the promoter. It's not doing a side deal that cuts out Kyle or the national.
Kyle has what they call pods. A dealer will take the 10 tables and then sublet some of the tables to their friends.
We're talking
That's
about
all above board. But then you're still subletting your tables, particularly because they're Kyle's tables.
But at the national, there's a long waiting list. You've got people taking a pass because it's on the wrong coast. If they're West Coast or East Coast, they're looking at the venue and saying, I think I'll pass this year. But why don't I just keep my table and I'll sublet it, maybe at a profit?
How about
We're going to crack down on that.
Sublet some of your table. Let's say you and I want to do the national. I would tell you to bring some of your more esoteric material, and then you would set up Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, maybe into Friday. And then you transition to me for a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. My stuff is more mainstream. By that point, the people who would have wanted to buy some of the Beckett collection cards would have bought them. Then the people who don't really care as much would say, okay, I'm looking for my Mike Trout cards or my Aaron Judge cards or my Patrick Mahomes cards or my Connor McDavid cards. But it's the more rank and file cards. To me, that's a system that works in terms of dealing with the audience at the show. Not necessarily what they want to do, but that makes common sense.
But again, in the business aspect, there has to be somebody to sign the contract. Is it a limited partnership between us, or is it some new entity, or is it just a couple of guys? First of all, actually, we probably do have table priority. We could get 2 tables and we'll try to get them next to each other. So all these things are workable. But if I were to get a table and you were to get a table, and then we changed our minds, so I'm going to sell it to somebody, I think they're going to crack down on that, especially if I sell it at a profit.
They wouldn't know whether you sold at a profit unless you open your mouth.
No, but they could walk up to the table and say, hey, you're not Rich. You're not Jim. Who are you? Because this table number is registered to those guys. And if they say I'm their employee or something, they could make up something, and maybe they're from a different part of the country or whatever. They're going to have a story.
The problem is the National is 6 days long. It's an endurance contest, and you may want to take a break, even just to go to the men's room or just to get something to eat. You don't want to close your table. You want to have it covered. I used to take cards on consignment to the National in the 80s. If I took your cards and you show up at the show when you're there for a couple hours, Jim, come behind the table. Not only am I selling your cards, but you'll be here to actually do it. Is that really wrong? Because I'm already selling your cards. I'm just asking you to sit with me and we can chat about what's sold, what's not sold.
So you're saying the consignment arrangement is that I just have a showcase worth of cards, put them out. If nothing sells, then I don't owe you anything. And if a bunch of stuff sells, you get a percentage. If I'm taking more than half your table, that's different than if I'm getting one showcase over on the side.
That's my point. Where is the line?
But the other problem is badge sharing, lanyard sharing. For example, if you and I had a table, then I'd get a badge and you'd get a badge or a lanyard, and it would say that we're exhibitors, but it wouldn't necessarily say our name on it. In the future, it might.
I will tell you, at the Dallas Card Show, your lanyard has your name on it as a vendor. Our names are not on the VIP or super VIP badges, but they are on the vendor badges.
Now with cameras all over the place, showing up at the table of somebody suspicious you don't recognize. I've walked up to tables that I'm expecting to see a long-lost friend, and they're not there. It's somebody else.
Last year at the National, our mutual friend Steve Taft had a table. Steve's had some health issues. There were a couple of times he didn't want to be at the table all day and he wanted to step away, and somebody else was behind his table to help him. Whether he was listed, Steve wants some help. I don't blame him. Otherwise, you got to close your table.
Again, what I don't want to have is a culture of snitch that somebody walks by Steve Taft's table, and actually whether he's shut down or he has a sub there, either way, people want to visit with Steve and they're disappointed if they turn him in. Hey, something's fishy here. He wasn't there. Maybe he was just in the bathroom.
That's my point. He's just in the bathroom, or he's just getting his lunch.
But maybe he left early.
That's what I mean by where do you draw the line?
What the new national promoters might be saying is that on Wednesday, when the show opens, we're going around each table and checking credentials to see that the table registration and who's behind it matches. But that takes a lot of time.
What if you're unfortunately not there when they do it?
You have a checklist and you're just going through each booth and you're just seeing if you were the one doing it, which would be very convenient because you know a lot of the people. And I know a bunch of the people. You could say, oh, there's Dick DeCourcy in the Georgia music and sports tables. Check. But if you don't see him, you might have to come back later and say, I want to make sure who's here is supposed to be here.
Many years ago, I was looking at the National when I was still at Beckett, this maybe 20, 25 years ago. Blake Meyer at a table, and I looked, and nobody I knew was at his table. It wasn't anybody local either. He had done that 20, 25 years ago. But it's been going on since.
I'm just saying, if you give people a chance beforehand to come clean, to make a settlement, but if you try to sneak through and they say, forewarned, we're going to be checking everybody, and it's not Blake, so I work for Blake. They may say the right words, but how do you prove that or disprove it?
That's why it's an untenable situation, because I'm in favor of it on the concept, but it's the execution. And both of us know that Joe, Jimmy, and their teams are all very good promoters.
But there's a huge waiting list. And the other thing is there's a lot of old-time dealers that have two tables that don't need two tables. They regard it as their right to maintain their two tables. I'd rather have more people.
I agree with you. One is sufficient for a lot of them.
Again, they went from tables to booths. The table is not the same as a booth.
Each booth is 3 tables.
Thanks, Rich.
Thanks, Jim.
I don't think we're going to solve it, but I don't want to see a problem at the National. I want to see an orderly, fabulous show. You ought to be able to look at the roster of dealers, and that's who's going to be there. To be truth in packaging. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you in Cleveland.